company, and we were enjoying the food, the fun, and the fellowship, and they decided to go home. And as they went home, I decided to just chill out, relax on the couch, and watch some TV. But something captivated me as I focused my eyes on the television screen. Something arrested me. I wasn't watching CNN, I wasn't watching MSNBC, I wasn't even watching Fox News, but I was watching the Cartoon Network. Yeah, I was watching Cartoon Network. I was watching Cartoon Network, full of suspense and on edge. On the edge of my seat, I was watching SpongeBob SquarePants. I was watching SpongeBob SquarePants. And in this episode, SpongeBob was in a fight. I'd never seen anything like this before. I was on the edge of my seat seeing how SpongeBob was going to get out of this one. SpongeBob was in a fight with a giant, and the giant was bigger and stronger than him, and SpongeBob was all by himself. If you allow me to preach SpongeBob for 2.5 minutes, every now and then when you find yourself in a fight, recognize that friends will be few. Friends will be few. Patrick was nowhere to be found. Patrick wasn't there. And so SpongeBob was ready to give up. He was ready to throw in the towel because he recognized that there was no way that he could beat this giant. There was no way that he could fight match for match with this giant. And so finally SpongeBob got irritated. He got frustrated, recognizing that he could not beat the giant. And he told the giant, he said, "Look, if you're going to beat me up, beat me up. If you're going to hit me, but I'm just ready for this fight to be over." SpongeBob closed his eyes, ready for the giant to hit him. The giant reared back and hit SpongeBob. SpongeBob opened up his eyes again. He said, "Look, don't play with me. I said, if you're going to hit me. I'm just ready for this fight to be over. I can't handle this anxiousness. I can't handle this nervousness." SpongeBob closed his eyes and waiting for the giant to hit him. The giant reared back and hit SpongeBob. At this point, SpongeBob is frustrated, he's agitated, he's irritated. SpongeBob said, "Look, if you're going to hit me, but I am tired of fighting with you. I'm tired of dealing with this." He said, "If you're going to knock me out, knock me out." SpongeBob closed his eyes again. The giant reared back to hit SpongeBob. At that very moment, SpongeBob opened up his eyes and recognized something. SpongeBob recognizes that the hits did not have its intended effect. The hits did not have its intended effect. He saw when he opened up his eyes that the hits were not hurting him, but it was stretching him. The hits were not hurting him, but it was stretching him. And so finally, SpongeBob stood back with a smirk on his face, looked at the giant and said, "I must be made from a spongy material." Come here, let me talk to you for a minute. Every now and then you will find yourself in the middle of a fight. Every now and then you will find yourself up against the wall, but it's not until you stand flat-footed and face your giant that you recognize what you're made of. It's not until you stand flat-footed and face your giant that you recognize that the hits did not come to hurt you, but they came to stretch you. If you can only recognize that what does not kill you makes you stronger, you can look at your giant and say, "Giant, if you want to fight, it's going down. If you want to get it, it's going down," because you recognize that God will keep you. You recognize that God will provide for you. You recognize that God will protect you. Is there anybody in here who can testify that God will protect you in the middle of a fight? Is there anybody here that can testify every now and then, find consolation that the fights did not come to hurt you, but they came to stretch you? Amen. Square your shoulders back when you get ready to fight the giant. Square your shoulders back, lift up your head and tell your giant, if you want to fight, we can fight. If you want to fight, it's going down. See, every now and then you may have to fight in the hospital room. Every now and then you may have to fight in the courtroom. every now and then you may have to fight when you're home all by yourself. But how many of you know that God will keep you, that God will sustain you? Something you have got to fight no matter where you are. Is there anybody in here who can testify that when the devil decided to attack your family, when the devil decided to attack your children, when the devil decided to attack your home, he got a mess on his hands? He got a mess on his hands. You need to be able to tell the devil, if you think you're going to destroy my career, if you think you're going to give me a nervous breakdown, if you think you're going to pillage and plunder what God has promised me, you got a fight on your hands. You got a fight on your hands. In fact, high five your neighbor, tell him he got a fight on his hands. He has a fight on his hands. Here in our text, we see a father that's in a fight. Now, no, he's not fighting Pacquiao. No, he's not fighting Mayweather, but he's in a fight for his faith. Now, Matthew, how do I know I can win the fight for my faith? How do I know I can fight when my faith is on the line? Number one, you have to learn how to deal with a private matter in a public place. You have to learn how to deal with a private matter in a public place. Look at verse 17. And one of the multitude answered and said, Master, I have brought unto thee my son, which hath a dumb spirit. Now, in order to understand our verse, you have to understand the context of our pericope. Jesus is on the mountaintop levitating, chatting it up with Moses and Elijah and his inner circle, while the other 9 are in the valley being interrogated by the scribes. They're being interrogated by the scribes. The text does not say what they are arguing about, but let me exegetically propose and argue that if you know the history of the scribes in Mark, then you know what they're arguing about. In fact, Bible scholars can help me right up and through here. Mark portrays the scribes as the sworn enemies of Jesus. And everywhere Jesus goes, they argue for the authority of Christ. Now, I'm not sure how the argument went, but I can, with my spiritual imagination, I can see, I peeked in on the argument. And here's what the scribe said. Now, I thought you were one of the chosen. I thought that you guys were his disciples. Why are you not up there? Why are you down here? I hear the disciples saying, we are one of the chosen, but we're not up there because we have a work to do down here. That's why he chose us. The scribes responded, look, you don't have the power to do what you're doing. You don't have the authority to do what you're doing. And then the disciples responded and said, God gave us the power. Jesus gave us the authority. He said we have power over unclean spirits. He said we can cast out demons and devils. He said that we can anoint the sick and they can be healed. The scribes responded, they looked back at the disciples and said, you'll never be anything. You're not going anywhere. You're not about nothing. You might as well pack your bags, go back home, go back to your ghetto and go fishing. The disciples, frustrated, agitated, looked at the scribes and said, yo mama, whoa, now all of a sudden it's getting dirty. Shots are being fired. And now in the midst of this frustration, in the midst of this headache, in the midst of this heartbreak, in the midst of this confusion, fussing and fighting, bickering, bantering back and forth, the Father has to get the attention of God. Have you ever been in an environment so tumultuous, so hard, so difficult, so acrimonious, so contentious that it was difficult to communicate with God? Have you ever been in an environment with people who know they didn't like you, they weren't there to support you, that they didn't have your best interest at heart, but you still had to communicate with God? Here in our text, we see that every now and then when you are in the midst of that type of contentious, tumultuous, and acrimonious environment, you still have to get the understanding. You still have to get God's attention. You still have to get God's attention. I know it may be difficult. I know it may be tough. I know it may be rough, and people may not understand you. You may be misunderstood. You may be ostracized. You may be criticized in that type of environment, but you still have to be able to get God's attention. You have to be able to get God's attention. He was surrounded by the multitude who did not care about him. He was surrounded by scribes who were causing confusion, surrounded by people who at best best were spectators and who at worst were there to cause mess. But even in the midst of this confusion, he still had to talk to God. He still had to talk to God. Now I ask God, why in the world would you put this man in the midst of such a public place? Why in the world would you have this man to deal with such a horrific episode in his life in such a public place? He said, Matthew, the reason why I put him in such a public place is because there's some blessings that you can't get in the private sector. There's some blessings that you can't get when you're by yourself. There's some blessings that you can't get when you're all alone. He says, in order for me to give you some miracles, in order for me to give you some blessings, I have to put you in the public. I have to put you where people can see you. I have to put you where you can share your testimony. You ain't even got to say anything. All they got to do is look upon what God is doing for you. Is there anybody in here who can testify? So there were some places you went, you didn't have to say a word. You didn't have to open up your mouth, but the folk recognized that you had God's favor. You didn't even have to tell them where it came from. You didn't have to tell them who wrote the check. You didn't have to tell them who were your network, who were your contacts, but they just recognized that God was on your side. God was on your side. Listen, he says also, he says, Matthew, the reason why I put him in a public place is because there's a different type of desperation in the public place. There's a different type of desperation in the crowd. Listen, everybody can't cry out in a crowd. Some people are so concerned about what folks are going to think about them. They're so concerned about how people are going to perceive them. They're so concerned about the repercussions of their cry. But there are a few folk in here who can testify. You can be anywhere and cry out to God. You can be on aisle 6 in Kroger's between the milk and the orange juice, and you can think about what God has done for you. You can have a flashback and remember where God has brought you from, and you can go out and cry out to God. Is there anybody in here who can testify? I don't have to be in private. I can take my praise to the public. Look, if you want to talk about me, that's fine, but I'm still going to praise him. If you want to laugh at me, that's fine. I'm still going to praise him. I'm not worried about you. I didn't come to church to see you. I didn't come to church to play with you, but I came to get my blessing. Is there anybody in here who can testify? I gotta praise and I gotta get it out. I gotta get it out. So the question is, can you operate in a crowd? Can you be like the woman with the issue of blood? Can you keep moving when everybody else in the crowd wants to push you down? Can you be like blind Bartimaeus, who was blind but even cried out in the midst of the crowd when everybody around him wanted him to shut you up? Is there anybody in here who can testify? You can shout in the midst of folk who trying to get you fired. You can worship in the midst of people who don't have your best interest at heart. That you can holler in the midst of people who are trying to dig ditches for you. Is there anybody in here who can operate in a crowd? In fact, can we just take about 10 seconds and let the Lord know how we feel about him in the midst of this crowd? Can you open up your mouth and tell God how you feel about him in the midst of this crowd? I know it's 10:45. I know you suited and booted. I know it's Father's Day, but can you just take a few minutes and tell the Lord how much you love him? Can you take a few minutes and tell him how much you need him? Can you take a few minutes and say, if it had not been for the Lord who was on my side, I would have been swallowed up and destroyed. Listen, don't worry about who's sitting next to you, because your miracle is on the line. The devil is trying to take you out of here. This is a fight, and it's about to be the Thriller of Manila up in here. You need to understand. Open up your mouth and let the Lord know how you feel about him, because you are in the midst of a fight. Is anybody in here who knows your praise is a weapon? Look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, if you don't want to get hit with friendly fire, get out of my way, because I got a right to praise the Lord. I got a reason to praise the Lord. You don't know what I've been through. You don't know the issues that I have to go through. My worship is for real. My worship is for real. My worship is for real. Every now and then you need to open up your mouth and fight for your family. Every now and then you need to open up your mouth and fight for your finances. Every now and then you need to open up your mouth and fight for your career. Every now and then you need to open up your mouth and fight for your education. In fact, high five your neighbor, say fight for it, fight for it, fight for it. I know it's difficult, but fight for it. I know you may have to cry all by yourself, but fight for it. I know folks may not believe in your dreams, but fight for it. I know they might not write the check and underwrite what God is doing in your life, but fight for it. Don't worry about everybody else. How many of you know that God will supply all of your needs according to his riches in glory? Not only do you need to know how to operate in a crowd, not only do you need to know how to deal with the private matter in a public place, but secondly, you need to learn how to conquer your conflicts. You need to know how to conquer your conflicts. Look at verse 18. And wheresoever he taketh him, he teareth him, and he foameth and gnasheth with his teeth, and pinneth away. And spake unto the disciples, and they said they cannot, and said unto the disciples that they should cast him out, and they could not. They could not cast him out. Verse 18, latter portion of verse 18 says, and he took his child to the disciples, but the disciples could not cast the demon out of the boy. This is a systemic conflict. I'm sure the disciples did everything that they knew how to do. I'm sure that they anointed the boy with oil. I'm sure that they prayed. I'm sure that they did everything that God had required for them to do. After all, they had a mandate by God to do what they were doing, but for some reason it was not working. What do you do when you're in the fight of your faith and the church don't work? Oh my God. All right. Listen, don't throw nothing up here at me, but I'm just saying I see in the text that there's a frustrated church and there's a frustrated father. The church is frustrated because they can't fix it. The father is frustrated because his back is literally against the wall, and everywhere he goes, nobody is able to fix the problem. It's in the midst of this conflict that Jesus steps in. Some scholars suggest that he steps in to ease the conflict between two extreme polarities. One of the conflicts is that the disciples are doing something that they have been taught, but what they have been taught is not working anymore. The other extreme polarity is that the father is frustrated because he's running out of options. And in the midst of this conflict, in the midst of this frustration, Jesus steps in on the scene. Matthew, how do I conquer this conflict when I've tried everything else and it seems like it's not working? I have a private matter and I don't want to take it public, but when I do take it public, people are ostracizing me, people are criticizing me, and the very place I think I can get help, they can't help me. How do I deal with this conflict? Well, how you deal with this conflict is you wait on the wonder worker. You wait on the wonder worker. Isaiah 40:30 says, while you're waiting on God, you will experience some things that you've never thought that you would see. He said, while you're waiting on God, you shall faint and be weary, and young men shall utterly fall. But Isaiah says, just keep waiting on the Lord, because they that wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up on wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. It's in the midst of this despair and despondency that Jesus shows up and says, bring the boy to me. Listen, I don't know what issues you're facing. I don't know what problems you're hiding. I don't know what your secret issues are, but God says, bring the boy to me. I know it may be difficult. I know it may be tough. I know it may be hard. You may have been dealing with this for a long time, but God says, bring the boy to me. Listen, every now and then you cannot worry about what folk think about you. You cannot worry about how folks will perceive you. Every now and then you need to fall on the altar and say, it's me, oh Lord, and I'm standing in the need of prayer. Is there anybody in here who can testify you're not worried about how folks perceive you? You're not worried about how folks are going to look at you, but you are going to wait on the Lord. I like the way the songwriter put it. The songwriter said, you got to wait on the Lord. You can't hurry God. You just got to wait. You got to trust him and give give him time. No matter how long it takes, he's a God that you can't hurry, but he'll be there, don't you worry. He may not come when you want him, but how many of you know that he's always right on time? Is there anybody in here who can testify he's an on-time God? I didn't have the money, but he was on time. I didn't have the connections, but he was on time. I didn't have the friends, but God was. He was on time. Not only was there a systemic conflict, but there was an eternal conflict. There was an internal conflict. Look at verse 21. Verse 21 says, and he asked the father, how long is it ago since this came unto him? And he said, of a child. Look at verse 22. And oftentimes it cast him into the fire, and it went into the waters to destroy him. But if thou canst do anything, have compassion upon us. This is where, watch this, this is where his plea now takes a paradigm shift, because no longer is he just coming to God for his son, but now he is coming to God for himself and his son. See, the reason why there's a paradigm shift, he's not only talking about his son, but he's saying, God, if you can do anything, have compassion upon us. Not just my child, but God, have compassion upon us. The reason why the father is having this internal conflict is because he used to be able to handle the problem. He used to be able to handle the issue. He used to be able to handle the conflict. See, when the problem was small, he could wrap his hands around it. When the problem was small, he could hold it. When the problem was small, he could fix the situation. But now the problem has gotten too big for him, and now he doesn't know how to deal with it. He doesn't know how to fight. He doesn't know how to keep hold of his faith. And in the midst of this issue, in the midst of this conflict, the father says, God, have compassion upon us. God, have compassion upon me and my son. When it threw him in the water, I could rescue him, but now this situation has gotten too big for me to handle. I'm here, God, by myself. I have no place else to go. I'm tired. I've tried your reps, but I need faith. My faith is waning. My funds are drying up. God, if you can do anything, help us. Have you ever been in that type of situation before, where your funds were waning and your faith was few, and you said, God, I need your help. I used to be able to handle this. I used to be able to hold it down, but now this problem has gotten too big for me. Now I don't know where to go. I don't know who to turn to. And he says, Father, have compassion upon us. Now, how do I deal with this internal conflict? How do I conquer this internal conflict? First, you have to just believe. That's all it is. Nothing deep, just direct. You have to believe. Look at verse 23. And Jesus said unto him, if thou canst believe, all things are possible. I like the way the NSRB puts it. It says, all things can be done for the one who believes. There are some things that God will do for you that you don't even have to do for yourself. Okay, let me give you an example. I used to watch wrestling a long time ago. Used to watch wrestling, and every now and then they would have what was called tag team matches. They would have tag team matches, and so one person would, one partner would be on the outside of the ropes. The other partner would be in the middle of the ring, fighting the enemy, fighting the opponent. And so sometimes the one that was in the ring got into the middle of the fight. Sometimes the one that was in the ring was knocked out. In fact, sometimes they knocked each other out. And so oftentimes you would have the partner that's just on the outside of the ring reaching his hand out and saying, tag me. Because see, the partner on the outside of the ring recognized that he had something that the partner on the inside of the ring did not have. The partner on the outside of the ring recognized that he had his second wind. The partner on the outside of the ring recognized that he had more power. The partner on the outside of the ring recognized that all he had to do was fall on the enemy and they could win the fight. And so sometimes the partner would reach out to the other partner on the other side of the ring, and he would give all of his might. He would struggle, he would strain trying to get to his partner. And so I said, God, well, what does that have to do with anything? He said, Matthew, I want you to go to Beulah to let them know, yes, they may be on the mat. Yes, they may be bloody, abused. Yes, it may be an issue, but they have somebody in their corner. They have somebody in their corner who will help them. They have somebody in their corner who will provide for them. They have somebody in their corner who has more power than them. All you got to do is just reach up and tag them. All you got to do is just reach up and tag. Is there anybody in here who can testify, God, I'm reaching out to you. God, I need you. I can't make it without you. God, I'm laying on the mat. Life is trying to take me out of here. But Father, all I need to do is reach up and tag you. Is there anybody in here who made up in your mind every time you come to church, you're going to reach up and tag the Lord? Look, every time you come to church, you're going to reach up and get into God's presence. Every time you come to church, you're going to do what needs to be done in order for you to get the victory. In order for you to get the victory. In order for you to get the victory. Finally, the third thing is you have to focus your faith on the future. You have to focus your faith on the future. Look at verse 24. Look at verse 24. And straightway the father of the child cried out and said with tears, Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief. In other words, the father is saying that, God, I could believe up to this, but I can't believe after this. The father is saying, I could see up to this, but I can't see after this. See, the father had enough faith to go from home to Jesus, but he did not have enough faith to go from Jesus to home. He had enough faith to get his child to Jesus, but he did not have enough faith to believe that God could heal his issue. He could see up to this, but he could not see after this. Listen, you have to believe there is something after this. You have to know that there is a blessing after this. I know it's been rough. I know it's been hard. I know you have been dealing with issues up to this. I know you have been struggling up to this. I know it seems like folks are few up to this, but God says there is something after this. There, you have to focus your faith on the future. Yes, your present might be difficult. Yes, your present might be hard. Yes, your present might have trials and tribulations, but God says there's something after this. Look at your neighbor. Tell your neighbor there's something after this. There's something after this. Faith will let you see after the heartbreak. Faith will let you see after the grief. Faith will let you see after the trial and tribulation. Listen, don't give up the fight because there is a future after this. Don't pull the trigger because there is life after this. Listen, there is glory after this. There is promise after this. There's life. There's a future. There's love. There's joy. There's peace. There's long suffering after this. You have to give your faith, focus your faith on the future. You have to focus your faith on the future. Is there anybody in here who can see yourself after this? Is there anybody in here who can testify? Yes, it may be difficult, but I see myself after this. Yes, I may not have the money, but I see myself prosperous after this. I see myself with long life and health after this. I know the devil is trying to take me out of here. I know he's trying to attack my family. I know he's trying to attack my business, but I see something. I see something after this. I see it. I see it. Is there anybody in here who can use your spiritual imagination and you see yourself after this? Look, only the folks who can see themselves after this don't have to wait until the battle is over, but they can shout right now. Only the folks who can see themselves after this can't be held down by ushers. Only the folks who can see themselves after this who can say, you know what? I'm going to enter into his gates with thanksgiving and into his courts with praise because I see myself. I see myself after this. You have to focus your faith on the future. You have to have faith Yes, you're in a fight. Yes, your faith is on the line. Yes, you have to fight for your faith. But when you have faith, you have the force of God. When you have faith, you have the force of God. Listen, when you have the force of God, no weapon formed against you shall prosper. When you have the faith of God, God shall supply all of your needs according to his riches and glory. Listen, when you have the faith of God, or force of God, all things work together for the good of them that love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. Listen, when you have the force of God, he shall supply all of your needs according to his riches and glory. When you have the force of God, he will not withhold any good thing from you. Listen, when you have the force of God, 1,000 may fall at thy side and 10,000 at thy right hand, but it will not come nigh thee. High five your neighbor, say, may the force be with you. May the force be with you. Is there anybody in who has the force of God? Is there anybody in who can testify, I have God's favor on my life? Yes, it's difficult. Yes, it may be tough, but I have the force of God. Is there anybody in here who can testify you still have your faith? Is there anybody in who can testify you've been up against the ropes? You had issues in your life, but you still have your